Okay, I'm just gonna say it. Wicked for Good sounds like a dating ad for people who are moral opposites. It's like Mask for Mask, but wicked. Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel and to a slightly late edition of this week's Wicked Wednesday. I also have some news that may be distressifying. This is the final Wicked Wednesday, not only of 2024, but of the series. I know, it's the end of an era. A brief era. Because as much as I've been enjoying the Wicked movie, I do not have enough to say about it that will last me an entire year up to the release of the second film. But that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Wicked Part 2, aka the newly announced title, Wicked for Good. So if somehow you clicked on me accidentally, let me catch you up. My name is Mickey Joe. I am a musical theatre themed content creator here on social media. That's right, it is good to see me, isn't it? So predictably, I have been very excited about the recent release of Wicked Part 1 in cinemas. We have been talking about it extensively here on my channel. I have reviewed the film both with and without spoilers. We have talked about similarities and differences with the stage musical upon which it is based that continues to run on Broadway and in the West End. We have talked about Easter eggs that nod not only to that musical but also to the book, as well as to the film adaptation of The Wizard of Oz, and some that point towards the story's future in Wicked Part 2. Now, when this was originally announced, people had very mixed feelings, many of them negative, about the idea of splitting Wicked into two films. But like I said in my review video, having now seen Part 1, I see the vision. I understand where director Jon M Chu needed to take this and why he felt as though he needed the space of two films. Because look at all of the added depth that we got in the first one. A lot of people have now said to me they actually enjoy a lot of the characters in the film more than in the stage musical because they have room to breathe. We have the necessary space to flesh out all of those characters and their narratives, and I'm very excited to see what's going to happen in the second act, because I think we're going to see even more of that and even more departure potentially from the stage musical, because Act 1 of the stage musical is pretty tight. Act 2 does not work as well as a standalone film in my head, so I feel like we're going to see a few changes, some of which we already know about. Now, there will be spoilers in today's video as I talk you through everything we know so far, as well as everything we can expect to see in Wicked Part 2. I will be invoking plot points from the musical, so if you haven't seen it, if you don't want to know what happens, then you probably don't want to watch much of this video. But I will also be acknowledging a couple of set leak photographs, as well as one leaked trailer that gave us a couple of hints about what was to come, but I will flag those to you if you don't want to know about those before I get to them. In the meantime, let me know in the comments down below, what are you expecting from Wicked Part 2, aka Wicked for Good? Are you excited about it? How could you not be? And which do you think might be some of the biggest changes we see from the source material? Finally, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel, because that Wicked Part 2 trailer is going to drop before too long, and I will be here as soon as I can get to a camera reacting to it and talking through everything else that we will have learned. I'm very excited. I hope you are as well. Let's talk about it. What do we know about Wicked for Good? So let's begin with this new title, Wicked for Good. I like it better than Wicked Part 2 conceptually. There's a lot of discussion about, like, are they going to now change the title card in the first Wicked movie where it says Wicked Part 1? Are they going to change it to just Wicked? Are they going to call it like Wicked Defying Gravity? And I'm not as concerned as some other people are about like continuity between those two and the way that they're titled. I like Wicked for Good as a title, and I think they have been setting up this for good moment, which, if you don't know, is a duet that they sing towards the end of the stage musical, so this is going to come late in the second film. They've been setting that up as a pretty important culmination of both of their arcs and both of their narratives. We have already heard the for good theme teased in the first film, more so than we have heard in the stage musical. They are invoking that already. And just the way that this is being framed, with this extraordinary friendship between Elphaba and Glinda, and each of them, you know, driving this story, this is going to be the moment. If, like, Defying Gravity was the defining moment of the first film, but also that moment at the Ozdust Ballroom, then For Good is really going to be in response to all of that. It's gonna be the defining moment of the second film, so I think it's smart to title it that way. And I think this indicates to us that that's how they're thinking about the film, which is encouraging. Here is another question. In going from Part 2 to For Good, does this suggest that we are going to see more Wicked Universe set films beyond this one? Obviously, we will have run out of plot of the musical, but Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holtzman, the musical's composer and book writer, recently gave an interview where they said it wouldn't be Wicked Part 3 and 4, but they'd had a conversation about what could potentially live beyond this story. I am intrigued. I'm a little bit concerned, but I am intrigued. I don't want, you know, the success of Wicked to lead to something that's going to taint its legacy necessarily. But they have done such a good job with the first film that, you know, I have to have a certain amount of faith in what they're doing. I don't think it's likely that they're going to adapt the other Gregory Maguire Wicked novels, before someone says that in the comments. If they are, they would have to change them substantially, because if you don't know, Wicked the stage musical changes a lot about Wicked the Gregory Maguire novel. So going straight into, I think, Son of a Witch is the second book, would not entirely make sense. But there is enough Wicked lore that they could do something. Are we going to see Stephen Schwartz's interpretation of The Wizard of Oz? I mean, that doesn't really take place after Wicked, that takes place during the second film, and we're going to get to that conversation in a minute. We've already seen Andrew Lloyd Webber's The Wizard of Oz. I think every musical theatre composer should have to write their own version of The Wizard of Oz. Can you imagine Jason Robert Brown's The Wizard of Oz? Can you imagine Michael R. Jackson's The Wizard of Oz? That's the one I want to see. Hello. Anyway, that is everything we can discuss about the title. Let's talk about the scenes from the trailers, the released trailers, the public ones that we haven't seen yet. So one of these is from one of the older trailers, and it was Dorothy and friends, aka the Scarecrow, the Cowardly Lion, and the Tin Man, meeting the wizard, or standing sort of nervously in front of the big wizard head. This is something we know happens in The Wizard of Oz, but that's not a scene that we see usually in the Wicked musical. Dorothy is sort of in the periphery of the Wicked musical. She existed a little more heavily in it in early developmental versions, where Sutton Foster played Dorothy in like a workshop of Wicked. I found that out recently. Wild. But in the stage musical, as it would later become, she's only seen as a shadow or heard crying off stage, and we see like the aftermath of her arrival and the Yellow Brick Road moment, and we see a feud thereafter between Elphaba and Glinda. Now, we have already seen Dorothy and friends walking up the Yellow Brick Road holding the witch's broomstick after her melting at the very start of the first Wicked film, so it's already been suggested to us that we're going to see them slightly more in this world, and if you know the spoilers here, you know that we've already met Dorothy's friends. Again, spoiler alert, that is because the Scarecrow in this version of Wicked is actually Fiyero, who has been turned into a scarecrow in order to save his life by Elphaba. Boq is the Tin Man. Elphaba, again, in the second act, ends up turning Boq into the Tin Man in order to save his life, and the Cowardly Lion is that same lion cub, where is he? Over there, that she rescued from the classroom at Shiz. Not all are necessarily grateful for the way that Elphaba has saved them and protected them, but that is who they are. So if we do see them with Dorothy, are we going to have them aware of this? We have seen in Wicked the musical that Boq and the Cowardly Lion are resentful of what has happened to them and are deliberately wanting to kill the witch for some kind of vengeance, but they don't share that with Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, and we don't see any knowledge of each other from the Scarecrow and the Tin Man traditionally. Are we going to see them like pretending they don't know each other but having a lot of anger? Because Boq's whole thing is he loves Glinda and he doesn't like Fiyero that much, so how is he going to feel about Scarecrow Fiyero? Is he even going to recognize Scarecrow Fiyero? These are the pressing questions that I'm thinking about. I do think it's likely we will see more of the Yellow Brick Road sequence. We're probably going to have to see the house landing. Like, it's, in hindsight, kind of crazy that they just skip over all of that and are just like, audiences know that happens. We can just go to the bit after. Like, it's such a defining moment for Elphaba when this house lands on, again, spoiler alert, the Wicked Witch of the East, who is Nessarose. That's what Nessarose becomes in the Wicked story. We've already seen that teased with her stripy socks at Shiz and her magical slippers. If you weren't paying attention to that, then I can't help you. So I do think we're going to see the tornado caused by, spoiler alert, Madame Morrible, that's going to bring Dorothy's house to Oz. It's going to land on Nessarose, Wicked Witch of the East. We won't necessarily see Boq's reaction to this because Boq, per the plot, has already fled, but I think we are probably going to have to see and meet Dorothy to do a lot of that Yellow Brick Road moment. And this could be where much of the flesh of Wicked Part 2 comes from, is bringing a whole lot more Wizard of Oz into it. But it's interesting because traditionally we find out Boq is the Tin Man as the transformation is happening, but we don't find out Fiyero is the Scarecrow until right at the end. And we then realise retroactively that when Elphaba has read a letter from him and says to Glinda, we've seen his face for the last time, Glinda interprets that as death, but that's not strictly what she means. Now, the other trailer shot that we haven't seen yet appears to be Glinda at her own wedding. We see butterflies flying around her. She is wearing what seems to be a wedding dress, walking down an aisle. I theorized at the time this could have been like a flash forward Tracy Turnblad style I can hear the bells moment where she's thinking about her wedding to come, but we didn't see that in part 1, and there's no suggestion that that was something cut from part 1, like the poppy field scene that has been spoken about online that was a cut moment from the first film. So I think Glinda's wedding is coming in the second act. Now in the musical, Elphaba interrupts Glinda and Fiyero's engagement ball, celebrating their engagement, and this is the day that Elphaba chooses to go back to try and save the monkeys. As Nessarose points out, she's really going back to try and see Fiyero. And so how dramatic would it be if she's not going back to interrupt their engagement ball, she's going back to interrupt their actual wedding, Shrek style, to be like, stop the wedding, no, he's mine, and then they sing an angry song right there in the... I don't think any of that is going to happen, but I do think that they're just dialing up the drama and theatricality of that just a little bit by having it be the actual wedding, and then Glinda left at the altar rather than just abandoned in the middle of a ball, and then she's going to sing I'm Not That Girl reprise. Or is she? So this brings us to 2 new songs that have been talked about. Stephen Schwartz has said that it naturally called for 2 new songs in the expansion of the narrative, and there was no entirely new song added for the first film. They added a bit of music in the middle of the Wizardmania moment for the cameo that happened there. I don't know why I'm trying to talk around spoiler alerts. I'm hoping we've all watched it at this point, but he has said in interviews there was a real necessity for 2 new songs in the second film. My theory is, in the musical, when this Glinda moment happened, it's huge for her. When Fiyero goes off with Elphaba, this is a devastating betrayal by 2 of the people she thought she was the closest to, and she's seeing Elphaba for the first time in ages, and she's happy to... It's a whole mixture of emotions. Throw in the lesbian subtext as well, and she's just very confused. She has a lot to be confused about. And she sings a reprise of Elphaba's song I'm Not That Girl, which Elphaba sang in the first act and in the first film, about like, Fiyero's never gonna love me because I'm not blonde like she is. Yada yada yada, it's not easy being green. But I'm not convinced that a reprise is quite as meaningful when the interval between the 2 parts of the story has been a year long. And so I think this is definitely going to get fleshed out. I think this is probably going to be a wholly new song, because Glinda just doing a few lines of I'm Not That Girl as a reprise feels like something that happens in the second act because of pacing restrictions, and in a whole film where we have more time, she'd sing a bigger song, she'd sing a fuller song. So I don't know whether it's just a version of that is going to have more added to it and maybe like reprise a little bit of Thank Goodness as well, or if it's going to be an entire new number. This wouldn't surprise me. I think we're getting a new song for Ariana here as Glinda. My theory about the other song, I think it's a Fiyero moment. And I mean, really, there's a bunch of characters who you could give a song in what was the second act of this show. Boq could have another song to really sing about his position. Nessarose could have another song. We're going to talk about Nessarose because I think there's a lot to speculate about there. But I think with the way that Wicked Part 1 ended, with Fiyero getting on that horse and riding off with determination, this is not something we saw before in the stage musical. He is already determined to go and find Elphaba. Like the wheels have finally turned in what little brain that he has, and it seems like he knows what he wants at this point, and he has come to terms with his feelings. And As Long As You're Mine is going to happen quite far into this second film. I think we're going to hear a Fiyero song beforehand where he might sing about his real feelings for Elphaba. Maybe he can sing a version of it called I'm Not That Boy, where he sings about like the life that he has ended up living and the road that he took because he didn't question it, because he didn't, rally against the system or society like Elphaba did. I'm not that boy. Can you imagine? I can imagine. Listen, I'm seeing the vision. A vision almost like a prophecy, you might say. I'm open to speculation, though, about those songs. What do you think the 2 new songs are going to be in part 2? Comment with your theories down below, and then we'll come back to this video 11 months later and see who was correct. While we're talking about Fiyero and these characters, though, let's talk about character arcs into the second film, because we already saw slight adjustments from their characterizations in the stage musical, and I talked about this in one of my previous videos. But these characters could end up going to slightly different places than we have seen previously. Dillerman's fate is kind of known at this point because we saw Elphaba having those visions flashing forward to him in a cage in the first film, which is not dissimilar to how she encounters him in Act 2 of the musical. That I think is going to be really heartbreaking and be a really empowering moment for her to defy the wizard once more when he tries to get her back on side by offering her success and public favour and a rehabilitated reputation. One of the most substantial changes is likely to be the character of Nessarose, who has already had some alterations to their arc in the first film. There was a lot done to afford her more agency as a disabled character, as a wheelchair user, portrayed by an actress who is also a wheelchair user, Marissa Bode, who has spoken about being in conversation, being in dialogue with the writers about representation and about adaptations from the musical, which is not the best disabled representation, nor does it cast disabled performers in that role, to the film version. And there's something coming in the second act which a lot of people are very apprehensive about. Again, spoiler alert, Nessarose, once Elphaba returns to meet her in Munchkinland, expresses her irritation that Elphaba, her sister, flies around helping all of these animals and has never once thought to use her powers to help Nessarose. And she sings, "All of my life I've depended on you, how do you think that feels?" robbing her of any independence or agency by her own admission, which is not how she feels in the first film. She goes on to say, "All of my life I've depended on you and this hideous chair with wheels," which is not only a clunky lyric, and I'm not a wheelchair user, I'm not a disabled person. I don't think that's good representation whatsoever, because from what I see and hear from people, that's not like the relationship that people have to mobility aids, this resentment, this idea that like her entire life she's frustrated and she hates the wheelchair every single day and she's dependent on everyone else. For sure, for her to feel frustrations about this feels very human, but I don't know that that necessarily feels authentic to the disabled community, and I would welcome input on that, because obviously I can't speak to that personally, but I feel like those are lyrics we are unlikely to hear in Wicked Part 2. And they've never been recorded for the cast album, so, you know, people will notice the difference less. The other part of this is what happens subsequently in the scene is Elphaba ends up enchanting Nessarose's gifted silver shoes, which were their mother's, and they become magical, and they allow Nessarose the ability to walk while she is wearing them. And this, as you may already have agreed, is problematic AF. This idea of healing Nessarose of disability plays into a lot of harmful tropes, as does the idea of Nessarose begging Elphaba to do this in the first place. There are two different ways I could see this going, because they could really lean into the idea that Nessarose thinks that's the reason that Boq doesn't love her in the way that she wants, and she thinks that that is going to resolve everything about their challenged relationship. Or Elphaba could do this for her sister, thinking it's what she wants, kind of having become more out of touch with her, becoming a little more wicked, becoming a little less focused, even though it was very clear in the first film that what Nessa wanted was independence and agency, and Elphaba knew that. Elphaba was saying to their father, don't push her wheelchair, don't help her, she's fine, she got this. She was running after Miss Coddle to say, no, don't just like wheel her away and take her to her room, don't treat her like a child, don't infantilize her and patronize her. She can do this by herself. She is a young, independent Aussian woman, gosh darn it. And Elphaba knew that so clearly then, and we so see Elphaba being aware of that, that I wonder if this is to prove a point about the strain between the sisters, that Elphaba's like, you hate me and you resent me, fine, I'll give you the ability to walk, that must be something you want, and she stopped really understanding Nessarose and stopped paying attention, and Nessa during that could be like, no, I didn't ask you to do that, what are you doing? That wouldn't surprise me if that's the way they go with it. I think that would be quite a powerful way of invoking that whole conversation about like the disabled community and what it is that someone in that position would want. It's a very tricky subject, but I think that would be a much better way to tackle the conversation rather than to play into negative tropes without addressing them. And there are a bunch of different ways they could do this as well. It has been stated that there is some sort of rewrite that has happened around this here. I have very little time, I will say, for the people saying, how is Marissa, who is a wheelchair user, going to be able to do the scene when Nessa walks and everything that happens thereafter? And regardless of whether or not she's an ambulatory wheelchair user, I had read once that she was, but I don't like the idea of speculating about that. I think it's pretty gross. Cynthia flies in the first film, which is not something she does, if you don't know, on a day-to-day. Cynthia flies as Elphaba, so I'm pretty sure that this like very expensive film could find a way of portraying Nessarose walking. Like, Cynthia flies. I don't know why we're bringing this up. I actually find it quite ableist to even be having that conversation. Carrying on, let's talk about Boq and Fiyero and their respective transformations. Spoiler alert once again, Boq's material we've already seen substantially changed in the first film. He had many different lines of dialogue, and he feels already a little more tortured, a little more pained, a little less peppy, and so I think this is going to really go to an agonizing place when he has some of his best material, when he is telling Elphaba about how he's been treated by Nessarose, and he appeals to her to let him go and seek out Glinda once more because he just cannot take a hint. It's at this point that Elphaba has to turn him into the Tin Man in order to save him from a bad spell cast by Nessarose, who reads the Grimoire like she's Lea Michele. And this is not a transformation that you see in the original production of the show. When I saw it in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in a non-replica version, you actually saw him sitting in Nessarose's metal chair with a lantern on the top, and then the lantern swung down and like impaled his face, and you saw the start of his transformation into the Tin Man. It was like gruesome and horrifying, and I loved it. It was great. I think we're going to see him actually turn into the Tin Man more vividly in this film, and I'm so excited for that. I think it's going to be terrifying. And that's not the only horrifying transformation we're probably going to get, because I think when Elphaba is doing no good deed, and that is the moment that she's turning Fiyero into the Scarecrow in order to save him from the torture that he's receiving from the Wizard Guards. We already know that the Wizard's Guards are more bloodthirsty in the Wicked film universe, because the Defying Gravity lyric changed from get her to kill her, like they are out for blood. We know this to be true. I think if they're not saving the reveal for the end when he turns up as the Scarecrow, then we're definitely going to see it in that moment, him turning into straw and the Hessian, and oh god, it's gonna be gross. It's gonna have birds coming out of him and eating his innards. And listen, it's Jonathan Bailey, so I'd still be willing to make it work, but it's going to be challenging for us all. We are also going to get As Long As You're Mine, though, so let's all just take that moment and really hold space with it. Elphaba and Glinda, with some slight modifications, I think are going to go to their usual places. Madame Morrible, we've already seen being a slightly different incarnation of this character, one who is slightly more stern, slightly more serious, and so I think her altercations with Glinda and their disagreements in part 2 are going to be even more intense. I think we're going to see her leaning on Glinda even more to be this public figure, because that's not something that this Morrible seems to really be capable of. She's not warm like that. And listen, the wizard's going to wizard. Jeff Goldblum is going to continue to be Jeff Goldblum, and that is what I expect on that front. I do think Cynthia and Ariana are going to get to do even more exciting work in part 2, because they have so much more complexity to play. Cynthia as Elphaba is going to get to really become Wicked. She has all of this motivation behind her, but Wicked has never been a story about a green woman who was misunderstood and who never did anything wrong. It's about how the Wicked Witch did become genuinely wicked. She says this in No Good Deed. She's like, fine, okay, wicked, done. You know what? Done. Asked for it, you get it. You wanted wicked, you got it now. Glinda, meanwhile, has all of this conflict in Thank Goodness as she's singing about the bridges she crossed that she didn't know that she crossed until she crossed. Like, she's got a lot going on. That's before she becomes complicit in what the Wizard and Madame Morrible do in order to try and find Elphaba again, and then Glinda has to come to terms with everything that she has helped to engineer. Like, lots going on for her. I want to talk a little bit about casting and cameos and characters we haven't met yet. Now this could be a whole different kind of a spoiler. If you don't want to know who we allegedly might see in part 2, skip on ahead. But we have already seen a handful of West End performers. If you don't know, they filmed in the UK, so that is not surprising, with a couple of big Broadway cameos in the first film. Allegedly, we are getting more former witches in part 2, but they will be West End witches. The names that I have heard flying around have been the likes of Louise Dearman, who, if you don't know, is the only actress to have played Elphaba and Glinda as a full-time performer. She's insane. Also Rachel Tucker, who was Elphaba opposite Louise's Glinda the second time I saw the show, back in 2010, I believe. Kerry Ellis, the first British actress to play Elphaba, as well as the first person to do it on either side. No, the second. I forgot about Adina. The second person to do it on either side of the Atlantic. I've also heard talk that Diane Pilkington is going to be in it. I also know of a couple West End performers who are going to be in it because they have told me, but I don't think that's been made public anywhere yet, so I don't want to be the one to break. If they haven't said it, then I'm not going to say it yet. But I've heard that those four, that Rachel, Louise, Kerry and Diane, who are some fan favourite witches here in the UK, may be in the film. I am hoping against hope that Alexia Kadim, our current Elphaba and the first and thus far only black actress to play Elphaba as a principal performer, is in the film somewhere. I would have loved for her to have been the witch's mother, but I'm hoping she appears at some point. And that brings us to the big casting question. Who is playing Dorothy? If we are going to see Dorothy Gale in Wicked, who is playing her? And there has been much rumour and speculation on this front, innuendo, outuendo, and Dove Cameron's name ended up on a list on Google, on the cast list. I don't think Dove Cameron is playing Dorothy Gale, because if Dove Cameron puts on that little blue gingham dress and puts her hair in pigtails, she's going to look like her character from Schmigadoon Season 1, and her spending a lot of time with 3 men in the woods is going to have a different connotation. Let me tell you, I think this is going to be a very young performer, maybe even a child. Dorothy Gale is young, and there is an actress who has done a movie musical before, who has been at Wicked premiere events with not much of an explanation. I am talking about Alicia Weir, who starred as Matilda in the Matilda movie, which is really good. If you haven't watched it, go and watch the Matilda movie. Alicia is brilliant in it. She's an incredibly talented young performer. She's done other films. Her friend Misha Garbett from the Matilda movie, aka the Red Berry Girl, the one given it this and this in Revolting Children, she is one of the dancers, I believe, or like one of the ensemble in the first Wicked movie, but I'm still questioning why Alicia, I think she's been to more than one premiere. I'm wondering if Alicia Weir is Dorothy in part 2. I think that would make the most sense, but if you have any other theories you'd like to throw in there, let us know in the comments. Who do you think is going to be Dorothy, if we see her at all? Now, it's at this point we really venture into spoiler territory, because I have investigated, against my better judgment, some of the set leaks as well as a leaked trailer, and here is what we know from those. Skip ahead if you don't want to know. So we did see, and these have been pretty widespread over the internet, photos from the Munchkinland set, where they seemed to be filming, thank goodness, because we saw Fiyero in his Wizard's Guard uniform, which is not dissimilar to the one in the stage show. We also saw Ariana as Glinda, I believe, in a blue dress at this point with like a floaty sleeve. Everyone was wondering if we were ever going to see the blue bubble dress, and I always thought it was pretty clear that she was going to get more dresses in the film adaptation than she has in the Broadway show, where she just wears one blue dress for much of her time. We also see Michelle as Madame Morrible in another beautifully designed outfit. I love all of her character designs. But what's interesting about this is, thank goodness, taking place in Munchkinland, which is a change because traditionally that number takes place in the Emerald City. And it does feel quite consequential that that is the place that they go to. It feels like presidential candidates going on rallies to swing states. I have questions about the greater Aussian geography that I'm thinking will get addressed a little bit more in the second film, but I do already find it a little funny that the wizard has this diorama of Oz, and there's about 4 locations on it, and one of them is the secret castle that Elphaba goes to hide in the second act. Like, where on earth could she be? Well, should we check that big castle that is on the diorama? They have to know where she is because they sent Dorothy and friends to her, so it's not so much a secret after all, even though Fiyero suggests that it is. Anyway, those were the set leak photographs. There was also a trailer featurette shown at some sort of an event that had a few clips from the second film. There was a shot of Elphaba walking down into a basement surrounded by cages, whether this is her returning to the wizard's chamber to find all of the animals, and this is the moment that she finds Dillamond. We saw a reunion happening between Elphaba and Glinda in their new styles, Glinda having become more the Glinda the Good that we know in a ball gown, and Elphaba with like a lovely side hair parting thing, just looking like she's coming to her own a little more confident as Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West. And this is dialogue that we know from the musical, where she was saying, we can't all come and go by bubble, but it seemed a lot more friendly. It didn't seem confrontational at that moment. And it seemed to be happening indoors in a palace. So this would be a big change from the musical, where that is normally part of their altercation post-Fallen House on the Yellow Brick Road in Munchkinland. It also implies that Elphaba and Glinda will have some sort of reunion prior to her discovering her with the wizard and Fiyero. And that, I think, really is everything that we know and or can speculate about for Wicked Part 2 for good. I am excited about this film, and I am still cautiously optimistic, just like I was for the first one, because I think that's more of a slam dunk, because it's basically a college set high school movie where it's like, oh, they don't initially like each other, and there's like romances, and then they come to like each other, and there's this moment of empowerment. Wicked Act 2, Wicked for Good, is going to be a very different vibe tonally, so I'm super intrigued to see where this goes, how it's received, and I'm very excited about it. And I cannot wait for that first trailer glimpse. I will be right back on here giving you a full breakdown, as I am having a full breakdown. Until then, that has been our final Wicked Wednesday. I still haven't reacted to the cast recording from the film. I may do that at some point, but I'm also planning a bit of a festive break and a lie down, because this whole month and a half has been a lot. I hope that you have enjoyed all of the coverage of Wicked. If you haven't seen those other videos, feel free to go and check them out. I'll make a playlist here on YouTube with all of my Wicked movie coverage, and it will be added to next year when part 2 comes out. Listen, only like 11 months to go now. Less than a year until we can have days where we watch Wicked Part 1 and then go to the cinema to go and watch Wicked Part 2. Marathon. Are you excited? I'm excited. In the meantime, if you don't want to miss any of my coverage and news about the Wicked movie, as well as the rest of the theatrical universe, and, you know, Wicked on Stage, which I think is about to announce some very exciting London casting, make sure that you are subscribed to me right here on YouTube with the notifications turned on, and stay tuned for much more content coming very soon. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. Boop!
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!